An important and powerful function in Excel is called VLOOKUP. Think of V for vertical. There's a companion function called HLOOKUP. Think of H for horizontal. We're looking at a worksheet called VLOOKUP approximate. There are two major kinds of VLOOKUP uses, one for approximate matches, one for exact matches. On this worksheet, we're about to put in a reduction percentage in column E. There's a table off to the right in columns H and I. It could be on another worksheet. In our example, it's on the current worksheet. And by looking at it, you probably have an idea already as to what it's going to do. Based on the subtotals that we see in column D, we want to calculate a reduction rate. The subtotal for cell D2 is 1363. Now, different people might read this differently, but the way the VLOOKUP function is going to work is it's going to be comparing that value with different values in the left column of this table. And if we have not reached this 1500 level, then the percent below will apply, 3%. So we're going to be reducing this amount by 3%. Now, lookup tables, as this might be called, it's not an official name, can exist in various forms. They might have 3 columns, 4 columns, many columns. Sometimes tables are structured horizontally. Now, I could take this data right here, copy it with Control-C, and down here, by using a special right-click, paste special, there's an option here called transpose. If the data looked like this, we would be using a function called HLOOKUP if we wanted to look up data in it. If you're laying out a table for lookup purposes, it's probably more common to see data in columns. It tends to be more compact and it's easier to read. But again, nothing wrong with this other table. Now, this function called VLOOKUP can also let us compare large lists with other large lists. So it's not exclusively designed to work just with small tables. But in our example, that's what we'll be using. By definition, a VLOOKUP function allows us to compare a value with the left column of a table. And then, depending upon how that value falls into place, we can gather data from other columns in the table. And so ultimately what we're trying to get here is a 3% for this particular number. For the next number, as you look at the table, it has not reached the 2500 level, therefore it will be 6%. So I'm going to use the VLOOKUP function here. It can be used in two major ways, as I've said. This is called an approximate lookup, because the numbers we're looking at here do not have to match up exactly with these. Now, maybe one or two of them might, and that's okay, but they don't, for the most part, line up exactly with those numbers. I'm going to make column E wider. This is not truly necessary, but as I'm typing in the function, I want it to be clear on the screen. And I'll zoom in a little bit in the lower right-hand corner, clicking the plus in the zoom in slider bar. There we go, like that. And I also want to scroll a little bit to the left because we do need to see column D. When you use VLOOKUP for an approximate match, it has 3 parts to it, sometimes referred to as parameters or arguments. Here is the amount we're looking up, comma. The location of the table, it's these cells over here, comma. Now, which column of the table has the answer? If we're looking left to right at the column letters, we'd say column I. But when we use this in the formula, we refer to the columns by number. The left column, column H, is the first column. In this example, the second column is column I. We put in the number 2, not the letter I here. It's the second column where we'll get our answer. And if this is going to work properly, we're expecting to see the percent here, 3%. By the way, if that were not formatted, we might see it as 0.03, and we could format that off the Home tab with the percent. This was done ahead of time, that's why it appears that way. Now, if we're going to be copying this down the column, we need to make sure that our reference to these cells right here stays absolute. So double-clicking back in cell E2, we want this reference here to be absolute. So we can highlight it and press F4. And then enter, still the correct answer. The formula to the right, by the way, you might not have seen it, takes the original subtotal and then multiplies it by the difference of this percent from 100. So it's reducing it by 3%. In effect, this amount here in the example is 97%. So 97% of 1363.80 is 1322. So we are reducing these based upon the amount. And you see how the percentages change here. If the amount is under 500, it will not change at all. So if we drag this down into the fourth row here, where we have the 337, 0%, we're not reducing this at all, but the others we are. And we can quickly copy this down the column by using one of Excel's great shortcuts, double-click. Copy this down the column. And we can scroll down to the bottom to see how that's working through all these if we wish. And there's also a shortcut for that too. You can press Control period. It'll take you down there and then back up top with Control period. So this is an example of VLOOKUP being used as an approximate match. There's also one for an exact match. One other aspect about this that's important. The left-hand column of the table must be in ascending order. Now, suppose we were not paying attention to this, and maybe this entry here, by mistake, had been put in as 4,000. Now, keep your eye on column E as I press Enter. Most of those percentages changed. Now, occasionally, depending upon the magnitude of the change or where it occurs, you might not see any problem with the data. So you've really got to be attentive to this idea. Always check this out. When you're using VLOOKUP for an approximate match, the left column of the table must be in ascending order. And you must cover the lowest possible entry. It's pretty obvious here. We can't have anything below 0 in these. So that's covered. That's actually a 0. On the high end, if we have a subtotal amount over there that's higher than our highest entry, it simply reverts to the 8% as we see it here. So to correct this here, I'm simply going to press Control Z. And again, keeping an eye on column E, we see how those are all adjusted. Notice the entry over here for $4,700. That's well above the $2,500. We see that it's 8%. So we don't worry about the top end. And the low end in this case, we're not worried about. But if we started this at 500, in other words, if this were the location of the table, an amount over there to the left, below 500, would turn up as an error. Right here, for example, we'd get that. So this is an example of using VLOOKUP for an approximate match lookup.